From the sister ship of the Ever Given causing major scandal by running aground to a military minesweeper that recklessly entered protected waters and ran aground on some of the most pristine coral reefs in the world, follow along as we count down 10 of the most nail-biting times ships ran aground. Number 10. The Norwegian Escape to Nowhere. The Norwegian Escape was en route during a 7-day cruise in the Caribbean when it unexpectedly ran into some trouble minutes after its departure from the Dominican Republic that left more than 3,000 cruisegoers and 1,600 crew members stranded in a boat that was leaning precariously to its port side. The 1,000-foot ship got stranded on a reef due to veering slightly more west than usual during low tide paired with a strong wind. But thanks to the fact that the water level rises more than 3 feet when the tide comes in, the stranded people on board merely had to wait it out in hopes that high tide would refloat them. The ship had to wait it out overnight where it could be seen with all its lights blazing from the shore. And when the ship was eventually refloated, it was found that it had sustained significant damage and the cruise was promptly canceled. The entire fiasco was live streamed by the passengers on board, who ended up receiving complimentary flights home from the cruise line. Number 9. Forever getting stuck. Merely a year after the Ever Given caused one of the most catastrophic blockages when it ran aground in the Suez Canal, its sister ship encountered a similar incident that left it stranded off the port of Baltimore for more than 5 weeks. Multiple efforts from rescue teams and tugboats failed to release this huge container ship from its muddy restraints. And after this disastrous incident, it was found that the ship was attempting to sail in water that was 25 feet deep at the most, while the Ever Forward needs a minimum of at least 43 feet of water to sail smoothly. The vessel is a staggering 1,096 feet long, but thankfully it ended up running aground in a place where it didn't cause too much of an obstruction. This is what gave experts the time to figure out how to remove this giant stranded whale. Some of the containers on the ship were carefully unloaded with cranes to lighten the weight of the ship so it could be lifted. And while this was a very daunting endeavor, the cause of this dramatic running aground was never revealed. Number 8. The grounding of the USS Guardian. The grounding of the military USS Guardian landed the U.S. in quite a bit of hot water when the captain ignored warnings from locals that they were entering protected waters. This reckless decision caused the minesweeper to run aground on one of the most pristine and famous coral reefs in the whole world, causing widespread outrage from the Philippine locals and the world. The vessel had already damaged the reef so much that the U.S. military had to sacrifice the $300 million boat and have it cut up to remove it in the least damaging way. The commanding officer on duty when this dramatic grounding occurred was immediately relieved of his duties after this happened. The vessel was stranded on the reef for over a month, and it had many political implications. It was estimated that the USA had to fork out quite a few million more to cover the environmental cleanup, making this one of the costliest Navy vessels to ever run aground. Number 7. Pasha Bulker. The Pasha Bulker was the cause of a great spectacle when it was blown aground off the coast of Wales due to a combination of unfavorable factors that led to it being stranded for more than 25 days. When the ship was trying to wait out a severe storm, it was being relentlessly bashed by winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. The 76,000-ton vessel swayed miserably in the huge waves, with the crew miserably trying to wait out the storm. But as the situation worsened, a perilous rescue mission had to be set in motion that took many hours to rescue all 22 crew members by carefully helicoptering them off the grounded vessel. Thankfully, no one was injured, and none of the fuel on board the damaged vessel was spilt into the ocean. The dangerous grounding situation is now believed to have been caused by captain fatigue, poor communication on board between the captain and crew, incorrect procedures, and extremely bad weather. After nearly a month stuck aground, the vessel was finally refloated, and another year after that, the damages on the ship were fixed, and it was able to return to sailing the seas, hopefully without running aground anytime soon. Number 6. Rise and Shine. The Panama-flagged Rise and Shine suffered catastrophic damage when it ran aground off the coast of eastern Russia. The cargo vessel got stuck near the port of Nakhodka during a very severe ocean storm that proved not even the biggest ships are a match for the might of the ocean. The ship was carrying 200 containers and more than 300 tons of fuel and lubricant. But thankfully, no serious environmental damage was reported from this dramatic grounding that led to the entire hull of the Rise and Shine cracking and breaking apart. The ship lost the fight with the sea storm with raging winds of over 33 miles per hour and swells rising to as much as 9 feet. The 14 crew members were carefully transferred to shore through a dangerous helicopter mission, but the large vessel seemed to be a lost cause. There was no way to reach the ship that was in a very compromising position at the mercy of high seas and fierce winds, and it ended up breaking apart into multiple pieces. Number 5. The Trusta Star. The Trusta Star was a Mauritian flag tanker that caused a whole bunch of issues when it ran aground on Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. A gaping, growing hole of several feet was spotted quickly after this vessel washed up on the rocks, and its untimely end was due to a tropical cyclone passing through the area. The vessel has been breaking apart in several pieces and is rapidly falling apart, but it quickly became apparent that the 8 tons of fuel that the tanker was carrying was being released into the ocean and could be seen in big parts of the ocean around Reunion Island. Apart from the jagged hole that was quickly filling the ship with water, parts of the hull of the ship were being torn away from the structure. The tragedy of this disaster did not stop at the grounding, though, since the millions of dollars needed for cleanup and the responsibility for it was being passed around like a hot potato. Poor planning and insufficient funding led to this wreck not being able to be properly salvaged, and the environment suffered great damage from one of the worst incidents of a ship running aground we have ever seen. Number 4. The American Spirit. The grounding of the American Spirit is the prime example of what happens to the current of the ocean when there's heavy rain and wind. The 1,000-cargo vessel was carrying 64,000 tons of iron ore that was bound for Indiana. But on its way to the aerial lift bridge to get into the open ocean, a swell of water pushed the ship completely off course and into a muddy bank where it promptly became stuck. Thankfully, no one was injured and there were no signs of serious environmental pollution, but spectators watched in horror for a few moments when the vessel was moving uncontrollably at the mercy of the currents and came nail-bitingly close to crashing into the breakwalls of Duluth. The treacherous currents in the channel were mainly to blame for this incident during the rough weather conditions, but thankfully rescue efforts were successful and the ship was eventually freed. Number 3. The Sea Eagle. The powdery white sands of the famous Deerfield Beach in Florida became the scene of a dramatic ship grounding when a tugboat and barge crashed on the sand banks. An entire stretch of the beach was closed off, as well as a big part of the ocean surrounding the wreck that ran aground. This was done for safety reasons while the wreck was being secured. There was an immediate danger of more than 10,000 gallons of diesel spilling into the ocean, but thanks to a prompt and effective cleanup effort, all traces of oil were successfully removed from the ocean. The vessel was carrying ammunition, and none of the people on board this 70-foot tugboat were injured in the grounding. As soon as the ship was deemed safe from contaminants, it was removed from the area. Number 2. The Grace of a Viking. The passenger ferry Viking Grace caught itself on the wrong end of a storm when it unexpectedly ran aground in the Baltic Sea, stranding over 400 crew and passengers on the vessel that was now firmly stuck aground. The huge vessel came to a halt merely a few hundred yards short of the passenger terminal here, but thankfully no injuries were reported during this nail-biting ship grounding. The ship was eventually freed thanks to the efforts of tugboats, but emergency services were on hand the entire time to assist in case of disaster. The boat was towed to port, where the crew and passengers were able to disembark. Viking Grace was able to make its way to its destination for damage inspection under the power of its own engines. It's believed that heavy winds pushed the vessel onto the shore, bringing it frighteningly close to the land. Number 1. Isle of Man Mishap. Residents of the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea flocked to the beach to see a very unusual sight. A small cargo ship that had run aground overnight on the north beach of the island. The 32-year-old vessel quickly became a hotspot for visitors and went viral on social media. The captain had experienced sharp intestinal pains at about 2 a.m. and briefly abandoned his post at the bridge, which led to the ship running up to the beach and getting stranded during high tide. The Latvian-flagged cargo vessel was thankfully refloated after many attempts after approximately 24 hours, and no environmental damage or injuries were reported. The vessel was carrying wheat to Belfast and is the perfect example of how badly a situation can go wrong if protocols are even slightly neglected at sea. The might of the ocean should clearly never be underestimated, as its force easily runs even the biggest ships aground. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. But before you go, make sure you check out our other awesome videos on screen right now.